It's gone so fast. So just so we know, after this session, we will be joined by Richard, who's doing a practice pitch session at 3. Okay, so for today's session, we are going to be hearing from Sydney and Susan, who are the founders of Loop Not Luck and Ugenie. And what's really unique about this session is these are two brilliant founders who were just in your shoes, 12 to 24 months ago. So it's really useful because they're going to have a very fresh and recent perspective on fundraising, finding new users. We'll be talking about pivots, but with someone who's like just done it and not like, did it in 2015 and the market's changed and everything. So hopefully it'd be extra relevant. As you guys know, put questions in the chat, ask them afterwards. You guys know the drill by now. But Sydney and Susan, to get started, can you both introduce yourselves and share a little bit about your company?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name's Sydney Samuels. I'm the founder of Loop Not Luck, as Purdy mentioned, and Loop Not Luck is a diverse recruitment platform. So we help companies to connect with and attract diverse and underrepresented talent, focusing on the entry-level space and industry agnostic. So I'm sure, as you guys know, like people and finding the right people for your company is a really important part of business, and actually making sure that your company is diverse is becoming a more and more kind of important and recognized priority for businesses, not just for PR purposes, but actually because of all the data that supports diverse companies performing better. But actually connecting with people within those communities is very time and labor and money intensive, without a very clear ROI. So we help businesses to solve that problem. And yeah, so I mean, I feel like there's not really one real kind of start date in terms of when I started the business, but I was talking to Purdy earlier. I think I started thinking about fundraising around this time last year, and we closed our round at the beginning of August this year. So I would say that I probably spent about 3 months kind of trying to work out what the hell was going on in the landscape and talking to people and starting to build my network, because I knew absolutely nobody, kind of no angel investors, no VCs, and kind of just had to find people who could try and give me some insight and some guidance as to where to start. And we kicked off properly around the end of February, beginning of March. And yeah, so we started hiring and kind of paying people around kind of March as well, which was a really good time to show that actually we're growing. We were revenue generating, which I think was quite attractive and is attractive in kind of economically unstable times. We've built our platform, like I said, making some money, got over 16,000 candidates who are actively looking for opportunities on the platform, and started to close some more recognizable names than smaller businesses and startups. So the Economist Group, we recently got a yes from AWS. In conversation with Meta, I know that their stock price is plummeting at the moment, and they've kind of freezed hiring. But interestingly, a lot of these big companies have freezed hiring for every department apart from early careers, because they can get lots of talent for cheap. So luckily, because we're industry agnostic and we're focused on that entry level space, it isn't affecting us too drastically, but it's still making things harder. And yeah, just really happy to speak openly and honestly about the journey. I'm sure you guys know the stats about women raising investment, but then also the stats around Black women raising investment. It's a little bit harder. So yeah, I'm happy to give you an honest perspective of what my experience was, and hopefully help you guys along your journeys.
Gosh, there's so much to dig into there. Definitely want to hear about finding investors with no network and also breaking into large corporates. So I'll ask follow-ups in just a moment. But Susan, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Susan Kabani. I'm the founder and CEO of Ugenie. We've been around for a little bit longer, and I've taken a very non-traditional approach to fundraising. So we have raised $500,000 to date, but we've done it in very small chunks and agile fundraisers. Definitely leveraging our network the most. So I was able to really kind of go out, and happy to share how we ask people for money without asking them for money, which is always kind of difficult in the early days. But we decided that last year we were ready for our seed raise. we started to really prepare, to talk about some practical steps. We invested in getting a really high quality pitch deck done, which is the first time I'd done that. And it really sets us apart from, the millions of pitch decks that investors are seeing. So even when we get a no, it's a very professional opinion that they're getting of us, and we can then go back to them later. So happy to talk to you guys about that. We did shift our strategy. We're not going to raise our seed just yet. We're going to raise a portion of it because things are just changing so much with especially the British economy right now. And so we decided to raise another 300 grand rather than $1 million. We've been growing as well in a recession, which has been fantastic. So our metrics are getting stronger. And we figured that if we paused the rest of the fundraise till next year around the tax time, when people are really starting to aggressively look for where they want to put their capital, then it would be a better valuation for us as well, and our metrics will just be stronger. Can also talk to you guys about why we decided to not go down the VC route. Have fully explored it, but that's not where we're kind of going, and that's probably not even where I may go my next round. So I need the dynamics of angels versus family offices versus VCs and all the different types of funding that are out there. Happy to answer any questions on that. Most of our funding has come from the earlier rounds was friends and family, but the last big chunk is coming now from strategic angels who we know can open up commercial opportunities. So I think as women, and then I can wrap up, I haven't even told you what Ugenie does, but I think as women, we have to be a bit more resilient as well, in terms of if we can't get that funding, we have to go out and make it, right? So a lot of our funding actually comes from revenue, and at a small scale, we might be profitable quite soon. But I'm a B2B SaaS platform for memberships and online communities. So imagine having like a private version of Facebook or LinkedIn. A lot of brands that have a growing membership or community, example, associations, private networks, they usually build their own custom technology when they're kind of over the social media phase, but that's becoming super expensive. And they're starting to understand, why are we building our own tech? Why are we building 5-6 figures when really the power of a community is in its community, not in the technology? So we provide that kind of off the shelf, private, mobile and web version of a LinkedIn platform with membership backend. So if anyone's building communities, that's kind of my bread and butter. But yeah, that's where we are kind of at. And we're going to close this 300 by the end of the year, which is really great, putting us in a good position for next year.
Love it. Okay. First question for both of you. What stage were you at when you fundraised in terms of metrics? Like, how many users did you have? Do you have estimates on like what your monthly revenue was? Any sort of stats around that? And then when you decided to raise, what were your first steps at finding investors?
I can jump in first for this one. So we actually had to build something before we could get users. We were, sometimes you get that advice of go be lean about something, right? Try to build something using a spreadsheet. Version 1 of Ugenie, and I'm sure the topic of pivots will come up, was a task sharing platform. And we didn't think that existed on the market. Although one of my advisors said, get an Excel spreadsheet and try to manually match people for tasks. So we tried that, but really the technology we wanted to build didn't exist in the market. So I guess I'm fortunate enough, my husband and I invested a bit of seed funding to build a prototype that we could then show to investors. We didn't have the capacity to build the whole platform though with our own funding. So once we built that prototype, that product market fit, this is where the pivot was starting to come about what people really wanted to see. That was when we decided to go raise our SEIS or our seed round to build the actual platform. But we did do it after gathering quite a lot of feedback. So we didn't build the wrong thing. So we weren't revenue generating when we started to build the platform. And I think at that early stage, it's sometimes easier to raise when you don't have metrics, because people can buy into that big vision and the potential market opportunity. And then again, we've just done agile raising, which I think has been great for me, because every time I raise a round, I'm getting pushed to say, what are your metrics? Are you growing? It's almost like if I'd raised £1 million on day one, I probably would have built something very different. Not to say it would be successful or not, but it would be very different to what's happened today. Because once we raised that first initial round of funding, I went out and networked and found our first paying customers. And then they were really a strong part of our kind of alpha and beta phase to help us get to this point. So we raised without customers, but we had raised about 100 and something thousand pounds just to get to that point. And then when we had paying users, we went out and started to say, well, look, we've now learned from our customers what we need to build next. And we were just doing everything based on, this is what we're raising for, and this is what we're going to do, which people quite liked.
Yeah, we were in a luckily in quite a cash heavy industry, which is kind of the recruitment and talent acquisition space. And our product market fit was, will companies pay for diverse candidate profiles, right? So we delivered that manually. And in our kind of first like test month, we got a few kind of startups and stuff like that, and said, you've got these roles, like we'll send you these candidate profiles, and for each one you kind of want to take forward, like anonymized, then kind of pay us this amount, right? And we managed to turn over about 10k in our first month, which was, so we were like, okay, shit, there's some product market fit here. So sorry, I shouldn't swear, should I? And so we were like, okay, that's a really good kind of obvious kind of proof that actually this is something, there's demand here for what we're building, because I'd heard so many horror stories about founders building something that they think is absolutely amazing, and it might solve a problem, but not a problem that people are willing to put budget behind or put their hard-earned cash behind. So that was a really important part of us being able to raise funding. But there are a lot of questions and a lot of difficult questions from investors around, okay, so how are you going to build this momentum? And also then how are you going to switch this into a scalable product? So yeah, those were the main things. I think that it was around kind of your, like our B2B kind of sales strategy. I mean, I've never worked in the industry before, so I don't have a pre-existing network. So basically I've been building that up over the last year, attending all the conferences, integrating myself within those fields, because a lot of our businesses come through building those relationships and through word of mouth and through referrals. A very small percentage of our business at the moment, when you haven't got a kind of huge pre-existing brand and like huge marketing budgets, isn't coming through kind of ads and kind of cold email campaigns and stuff like that, because I'm sure all of our inboxes on LinkedIn and email are just flooded with people trying to sell you something. So unless somebody that you trust, or somebody who you recognize before because you've seen their brand and they're trusted within the industry, it's going to be really difficult to get cold sales. And essentially, I think what our investors are looking for, what all investors are looking for, is this going to significantly increase in value if I put my money into it, right? And I think one of the mistakes that I made was, because I was on the candidate side, right? I was really struggled to get an entry-level job after university. So I understand it from the kind of social mobility, social impact perspective, but then also from the company perspective, working in investment banking for a couple of years and fintech, and then obviously now building the solution that I've seen there is demand for on the business side. So I was coming to it from a real kind of social cause perspective, but actually when I switched it from, actually this is not like from the candidate perspective actually to the company perspective, that's when it started to click a lot more for investors. But interestingly, it was the investors who, okay, they understood, okay, this is how you're going to make money, it makes sense. I feel like you're the right person to execute this, and I'm confident that you can. But all of our investors in some way, shape or form understand the kind of core personal kind of passion behind it, in terms of wanting to give people who are just as talented and just as capable access to opportunities. So like I was kind of mentioning before we started this call, having investors that align with those values, I think, were really important.
One question I have for you is, since you're building a marketplace, we have several founders in our cohort who are doing the same and are faced with, like, the cold start problem, where you have to find both sides of the marketplace. What side do you focus on? Do you focus on supply, demand? How did you go about that or approach that? In your mind, do you have one side that's more important, or kind of like the key lever for growth?
Yeah, so I would say, if I had to give a definitive answer what side to focus on the side that doesn't pay you first, because then you can go to the side that does pay you and say, we've got this amount of what you want, basically, right? Because they're not investing anything up front by kind of signing up and joining. So we had about 5,000 candidates sign up before we got our first kind of deal, because we would say, okay, we've got a lot of candidates on our database, like give us a try, essentially. And it's, I mean, we're kind of doing candidates a favor. It's completely free for them. So if they don't get anything out of it, they haven't really lost anything. I would say, if you are starting a marketplace where you do essentially need both sides kind of 100% to maintain, because if we've got students who are maybe in their third year and they're signing up in December, they're probably not looking for a job until summer. So we can capture that data and then use it and kind of hopefully get them an opportunity in 6 months. It's not like if you've got like a secondhand clothes marketplace and I mean, you've got buyers and you've got sellers, you kind of need those both immediately at the same time. I would say focus on one particular small niche, so that you haven't got buyers for this and sellers for this and you haven't got the other side. Yeah, that's what I would say. I'd say it's difficult. So with a marketplace, start with a niche and then you can always expand out. I think Amazon's a really good example of that. Started with one thing, which was books, and then expanded out.
Makes sense. Okay, Susan, question for you is, can you walk us through your pivot? What specific feedback did you get that made you want to change? How did you talk to your team about that? And how did you speak to, if you had like current users or current customers, how did you communicate that narrative?
Yeah, no. So we started as a marketplace, I guess. The whole idea of a task sharing platform. The vision was that was a B2C. People could download the app and join, and based on location and types of tasks, they could share things like dry cleaning, pick up and drop off with a neighbor, carpooling with mums. So we kind of needed a lot of people on the platform that wanted the same thing in order to build that kind of, both the person who wanted to share and the other person that wanted to share. We pivoted before we launched. So we built the kind of working prototype, as in didn't have a back end. It just had the front end. It had some screens. And we went out and talked to people and said, this was all just between me and the tech guys. That was it. It was just me and the tech guys for a long time. But when we went out and talked to people, this was also around the time, in terms of what was going on in the rest of the world, Cambridge Analytica started to happen. People started to have lots of challenges with their data on social media platforms. Facebook was having a lot of backlash. And while I was networking and again, just trying to show people, right, different communities, because it was always a community-based solution. What types of things would you task share? Who would you task share with? And I just kept getting a lot of people saying, well, could you just build a private version of Facebook? Can you just give us everything? We don't want to just share tasks. We also need to know who's in the community. And, we want to share other types of things. It just happened to be happening all at the right times, I think, where the feedback was coming. And I guess maybe who the people I was talking to as well. So we then started to talk to some of the community leaders that these guys were referring to. So somebody was like, oh, I'd love to have a really great way to connect with my church, but my church is not going to use a Facebook or a WhatsApp group. So, then we get stuck with notice boards. So the feedback is what kind of caused us to look at the business model. And also with the task sharing concept, we were like, well, how do we monetize this, right? We're gonna have to raise lots and lots of money very early on to get like hundreds of thousands of users on this platform to have the data to make this meaningful. So one of the things we started thinking about, I don't know if you guys have heard I know it's in the UK, but it's very big in the US, like task share or task ease, or there's these task platforms, right? So we thought part of our model could include that you could hire someone. So if you couldn't find someone to, drop off or whatnot, you could hire people, and that would be part of our model. But it just became quite clear that as a B2C, again, it would require quite a lot of funding, and that's just not the feedback that we were getting. So when we then decided to start really looking at building our entire backend and infrastructure, we had already decided to pivot to a community management model. So because again, these community members were saying they wanted to really connect with certain communities of trust and confidence. And then we talked to the community leaders and they're like, well, we don't have budgets. We're not going to be able to build our own tech, right? So we use what we can, which is whatever is out there. Sometimes it was as simple as a notice board, right, at the church. And they really wanted to be able to connect their members better. So we before we launched the product, we then pivoted into this task sharing concept, the private community. And I guess rather than users, I already had users that were ready to test it. They're like, when this is ready, we're happy to be your first customers, which was great. We did have to go back to the investors though, our early investors who had bought into the task sharing concept to say, look, we are pivoting to private community management. And I guess the thing that we were lucky on is a lot of the people who invested in us were from our community as it is, and they could understand the problem. They're like, oh, actually, that makes quite a lot of sense because we are, and we tapped our own communities as well for investment. That's how we started our journey. So they just got it, and they actually saw the potential is much bigger. it's someone asked a question about, again, why we're staying away from VCs. And sometimes it's just the mentality of the people that we all know are running these VCs, right? Middle-aged white guy who's essentially doesn't even use Facebook or social media, who then tells me that there's no problem. It's because they don't use the platform and they don't get it. So of course, my challenge is then how do I make them understand the problem? And that's something we all have to do. But when I talk to our initial investors, who are all very community focused, they just got it. So we didn't actually struggle. And then we ended up building a solution for people who were telling us what they wanted. So it was very kind of early adopter based driven development.
Okay. What did your first pitch look like? What were those conversations with investors like around the pivot? What sort of questions came up because of that?
So I guess I could take one step backwards of how we started raising funding in the first place. So we decided to just have a pitch, like a cocktails evening, and we invited everybody we knew. So, it's difficult, like when you're early on, most of the people that will invest in you are the people who know you and trust you as a person or a business person in your background. But we didn't feel very comfortable going to our friends and family and saying, hi, could you please invest in this startup that may or may not make it? And, we know y'all work really hard for your money. So what we decided to do also, just to get feedback on our pitch, was run these pitch nights that were just about us, right? So we would have people, we'd book a pub or something, we'd get where we could do a pitch, we'd pitch the business. And then those early investors actually came to us and said, this sounds really interesting. We get it. We can either connect you with someone, because our ask was always, can you connect us with someone who, might invest or look at Ugenie as a business, as a customer. And that's how we raised our first rounds, where we just started to do, kind of internal, and then ask our network to invite everybody that they might know. We ran a couple of those. Our first pitch night didn't go well. Actually, people were like, you missed quite a lot of the important elements, right? It was my first pitch ever as an entrepreneur. So it was a really good thing, though. It was a safe room, though, because everybody we knew was there that loved us and gave us really, really good feedback. Our second pitch night, then we closed our SEIS, because again, we had taken all that feedback on board. We talked about the right things. People from our network then invited other investors that they knew. And that's, I guess, how we got them in. But again, as our first set of investors were, again, really believing in us, right? They were investing in me and my co-founder, who's my husband. And they liked the fact that we were working together as well. But they're like, we believed in you. We're not, the concept is great, but we know that you're going to take this somewhere. So I think that's the other thing about early investors, is they're really investing in us more than the idea per se, because how many startups fail, right? So, and I still get that now. Even today, people are like, Susan, we're investing in you. We know you'll make it work somehow.
So you hosted your very own pitch night to pitch. That is such a clever workaround. I love it.
Yeah, we did about 3 or 4 of them, and on a no budget. So if anybody needs any ideas, let me know. Because I didn't have money to go and pay for people's drinks, but it ended up being an opportunity to really hone in, and we did 3 of them in the end.
Wow. Okay, Sydney, what about you?
All of my investors have said the same thing, that they like the idea, they like the business plan, they like the pitch, they believe in the business, but at the end of the day, they've invested in me. And yeah, can you remind me of the question again? Sorry.
Oh yeah, how you were finding your first few investors?
Yeah, so I looked through my Google Sheets tracker, where I was tracking all the conversations with people, which I highly recommend you do, even if it's just, oh, this person introduced me to this person and stuff like that, just tracking everything, because when it's just you're talking to a couple of people, it's easy to remember where you are. But when you're talking to 20, 30, 40, 50 people all within the same week, it's really easy to get people's names mixed up and to forget where you were with that person. And do you know what I mean? So every morning I would have 20 minutes of my calendar blocked out just to kind of rejig myself in terms of reminding myself where I was with all of these different kind of leads, essentially, and when I'd said I was going to follow up and what I needed to add to my list for that day to do. Because also in that kind of courting phase where you are having those conversations, they're getting to know you, the fact that if you say you're going to follow up next Wednesday, you do, it then gives them a little bit more of a drip of confidence in your ability, right? Because this is the only time where you guys hopefully are going to be on opposite sides of the table. So they want to see your professionalism, your business acumen, your punctuality, your ability to stand firm and hold your ground. So I actually said no to an investor who He's quite like a big dog and very influential because I didn't agree with his terms. We're still on good terms now, so I did it in a professional way. Hopefully he's going to invest in the next round. But I know he then invited me on to this like ball and event with his like family and his like sons and stuff like that, because I think that he respected me even more for saying no, because he probably doesn't hear it a lot. So being able to kind of treat it kind of like a sales pitch, like a business pitch, where you are kind of the core product in some way. I would say has really helped me to kind of get those early investors. Looking at that sheet, I had 154 contacts in terms of people that had either introduced me to someone I'd spoken to once, they told me to go away, or like, do you know what I mean? People I'd sent an email to and just got no response. So 154 kind of pitches in some way, shape or form. Not all of them were video pitches. And so my company's completely remote. So we've got someone in South Africa, someone in Nigeria, Pakistan, India, some across the UK. I wanted to test and see if I could like live and work remotely. So I went out to South Africa for 2 months earlier this year to live out there. I didn't know anyone. 1 month's notice. I can clearly tell that I'm kind of not very risk averse as a founder, and I think you have to be as a bit of a startup founder. And then got back from South Africa and got a notification about this networking event. It was quite jet lagged, but I went along anyway because it's about diversity in tech, and I was like, this is going to meet potentially loads of potential businesses here who care about diversity and who work in tech. So I'm like, this is perfect. So went and actually met the guys who organized the event, and they also ran a tech consultancy, and they ended up being my lead investors for my first round and put in 100K. And that was actually from just going to that networking event. I didn't even go to that networking event to meet them. I went to try and kind of get some of their customers and some of mine. Our other investors, so the two founders of that tech consultancy and the CTO all together kind of invested 100K. And then we got another 50K from this guy called Richard. So just a random introduction, again, talking to people and saying, like you said, Susan, in terms of, is there anybody that you can introduce me to? So I didn't know many people who worked in the recruitment industry. I was talking to this random guy who ran a random kind of accelerator for kind of to get Black people into tech. Just reached out to him on LinkedIn, say I wanted to introduce myself. I had no particular objective apart from building my network. He said, oh, I know this guy who works in recruitment. And he ended up being an investor who then brought along his other friend who added in 25K. So you never know where your investors are going to come from. I think that being nice to everyone, building relationships with everyone, and just getting out there and talking and having those conversations. And all of my investors I met face to face. And all of them said that when they met me face to face, that's when they were sold. The recruitment guy who I got introduced to through the guy who ran the accelerator for Black people in tech, he was kind of dragging me along for ages, for months, video calls and stuff like that. But it was when I kind of said, let's meet in person. And then he was like, pretty much, yeah, I'm in. He then said, I want my friend who's a CTO at a big company to check the tech before I invest. He did it. And then I had a phone conversation with him that lasted 12 minutes, and he said, I'll match whatever my mate invests. So he put in 25K, so he also put in 25K. So the last investor in was literally like a 12-minute phone conversation. And I'm like, got 154 people on this bloody list, and it's like, once you get in there and you get the right people on board and to say yes, it's a lot easier to then raise, because there's trust by proxy, which is obviously why it's easier for people who are already within that community, whose dad owns a VC and all this other stuff, or who's been part of kind of loads of different tech companies and who's got all of those kind of social credits, went to Oxbridge or Harvard. All these things that create kind of social currency that I can trust this person in their ability to deliver. So yeah, it was purely kind of accidental how we got our investors, but through the kind of haze and madness of trying to build that network with that objective. But I didn't plan for those people to become our investors. It just kind of, through my kind of trying lots of different avenues and lots of different doors and talking to everyone who would have a conversation with me, and managed to find the right people who aligned with my values and who believed in me. So yeah.
I want to ask both of you about turning down investors. I know you mentioned that, Sydney, and I saw, Susan, your comment about it in the chat. So how did you decide to do that? And I ask especially because, it's sort of like female founders get asked different questions. And so I'm curious if that sort of thing came up in DD and if that contributed at all to deciding to walk away. And also if there were any other terms that you were asked by either this investor or a different investor that you turned down or negotiated, that would be really helpful.
So we said no to the first investor, and it was a big chunk of the round, because he wanted us to use his developers. And so we felt that would then tie us and tie our hands, and we wouldn't be able to like lose our control of the business from like day one because it was his developers. So it was quite easy for us to say no to that. Although it was like 150,000 pounds that he wanted to put in the business. But ultimately, we ended up using that as leverage for everybody else that was interested. We said, look, we have this offer. This is not why it's the right fit for us. I've always been very transparent with everyone. And this is actually probably one of the places my newer investors think is my weakness, where I think as women, like a guy, and this is generalities, I'm sure other women are better than me at this, can go in and be like, I'm going to own this market. It doesn't care. I don't care how many competitors are in it. I don't care how big the market is. I'm going to go in and I'm going to be the unicorn in this space. And for some reason, the generality is that guys can do this. Whereas we as women are a bit more realistic, being like, you know what, there is a lot of competition in the market. I don't necessarily need to be the unicorn to win here. Like, do I need a 300 million exit, or do I need to always just be raising cash? What if my goal is to raise 25 million and exit and go do something else? And sometimes that honesty and transparency can also be used against you. Because I know some of the questions are, why do I want to stay away from VC? Because I'm not necessarily sure I want to be that next unicorn. I'm not saying I don't want to be it, but I'd also be very, very happy in 36 months to exit my business for enough money for my husband and I to like be financially secure and do something else. Because I don't see Ugenie as my last startup. I'm an entrepreneur by nature, and I might want to do something else. So, I think that and this is the difference within UK and US. If anyone wants to talk about the US market, it's so different than the UK. But we built a model that and I think this is also, my co-founder is a finance guy. So when he builds the models and then he shows them to me, and I'm like, I don't think we can do that, right? You're talking about 100 times the customer base in 12 months with like very little resource, because that's what people want to see. And I'm like, but I think I can do this, which I still think is very good. It's almost like that battle between trying to paint this really large picture that a VC wants, because a VC is going to want to, one of their out of 10 businesses has to do so well that it buys the losses of the others, right? So they're looking for a very different profile versus like an angel, a family office, some of these other businesses that are like, this could be a 20 million exit. And that's still very, very good. But it's a very different type of evaluation of the business versus what a VC is going to look at. So a couple of the things I was asked, which, and trends for me, and I think it's a bit different, like having my husband's a finance guy. So we would be pitching and people would ask him the finance questions, and they'd ask him the like kind of the things that they think I couldn't handle, like the numbers things. Now it's not my strong suit, but I need to know them as the CEO of my business. So I used to get frustrated. I'm like, why are you asking him? Because he would just defer back to me, be like, oh, Susan can answer that question for you. I'm the one up there pitching, and yet they're going to defer to him on the numbers. And so, I think that for me, I had to overcome that numbers are not my strong suit, and I had to know them even better than anybody else in the room so that I could say, these are my metrics, these are my numbers. And I guess it was confidence on my part as well, because I just not my strong suit. I need to know them more so I could prove to anyone, you don't need to talk to him about it. You can talk to me. And I only had one investor ever, and it was a woman who asked me if I was planning to have babies. Because again, if I'm the primary person in my business, and the thing is, I know there's a little shocking, right, that a woman asked me that, but to be honest, it's a legitimate question for an investor to ask you when you're starting a business that's all about you, the founder. Luckily, she still invested. She didn't actually pull back. And I was very honest with her. I'm like, yes, at some point I hope to have children, and that is definitely on my plan. But I'll figure it out, right? Like there's never a right time for them. I don't have kids yet. I'm sure the moms in the room would be like, there's never a good time. It was surprising that a woman asked me this. I don't think a man would ever actually ask. I think they know better that if they ask that question, they're going to get a lot of pushback. But I think fundamentally it was really interesting. There's a question in the chat about pregnancy. Like I I guess I'll be very honest, like I'm not actively talking to people about my fertility journey, like when I'm investing, right? That's not something anyone's asked me recently. But I've met a lot of women recently who have raised while being pregnant, and they're just doing it and they're nailing it. And I think we just need to own that. It's a part of the process, right? We will probably have kids. But as startup founders, we're probably managing 16,000 things as it is. One more thing is managing the kids. But that was a surprising thing that I got asked. And it was surprising but consistent that people would ask my co-founder, the guy, about the finance.
Yeah, that is not a question anyone wants to be asked especially by an investor.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
So
surprising for women though, but I think that's the thing people get shocked about, right? Is that another woman would ask a woman this.
You should know better.
I guess I'll say though, I wasn't upset about it because again, what if I don't have a great pregnancy, right? And I'm the primary force of my business. I don't necessarily think, I mean, again, I'll deal with it. You either have faith that I'll figure it out and as a founder. But it didn't bother me. I think it's a legitimate question. If I'm the one who is working 14 hours a day to get my business to where it needs to be, and what if I'm off my feet for a couple of months, right? And the first couple of months, everyone tells me are hard. So I don't know. I think it's just we own it and we just say, yes, it'll happen and I'll handle it. But it didn't upset me, I guess. And that sometimes people get shocked by that as well, but it didn't bother me. It's a legitimate question. I think that sometimes you just need to deal with.
Yeah, I haven't been asked if I'm planning on having kids anytime soon. I've got my goddaughter in my WhatsApp picture, so I think maybe one of them assumed that I had a kid, but I don't. Yeah, I think the guy that we kind of that we're still cool with, but who I had to just give a flat out no to, it was just the terms were just terrible. We'd already got 100K offer, and he'd kind of been kind of toying around with a much larger number in terms of he wanted to also put in kind of 100, 150, and then he gave me a 25K offer for half the valuation, and we'd already got 100K agreed in at double the valuation, and I was just like, no. Because I mean it would just kind of be a slap in the face to my existing investors, and you just can't do that. I can't agree a completely different valuation with different investors. So I said, clearly, like, we're not at the same level, but let's kind of keep in contact. I'll keep you updated on what's happening with the business, and then hopefully at a later round we'll be aligned. But I did have to take a day or so just to process that so that it came out in a professional way and not you've just been wasting my time for months. It wasn't a rejection, but it was, I got a conversation with this guy who is like super, like the number one person in the recruitment industry, and he's like royal family related, like super influential, right? And I was like, okay, if I can get this guy aware of my business or even potentially get his buy-in, it was kind of a last minute conversation, so I don't have a lot of time to do much kind of research on him, but had a look at his LinkedIn profile, super connected, and I was like, okay, this is somebody that was good to speak to, right? He was in his villa in Ibiza, and we had a phone conversation and for 15 minutes, and he pretty much told me that that diversity doesn't matter, people don't care about it. He said, you're not going to make a penny. He's like, I think this is absolutely terrible. Recruiters, companies, nobody basically gives a beep about diversity. You're wasting my time. I don't want to chat to you. And he was like, absolutely, like just the wildest conversation that I've ever had. And then after we closed that round, I was kind of like, and after now we're closing some kind of big customers. I'm like, okay, yeah, fair enough. But I was just like, it was so shocking that I just had to laugh because there was no other way to do it. Then did some more research into him and found out that he's really not a very nice man. And I definitely wouldn't want to be associated with him in any way, shape or form. So I think that those I've never had a rejection or someone just be plain rude and disrespectful and just have no grace or decorum about them, apart from in that conversation. A lot of people will kind of just go ghost if they don't want to say, they won't say no, they just won't say anything if they're not interested, which is fine. No response is also a response. And I think that the best example to compare kind of raising to is dating. Is that if you're super desperate and like double texting all the time and following up all the time, it seems like, oh, this person's not that desirable because they're overly keen. Whereas obviously you might have heard the phrase like the best startups aren't raising. It's kind of like the best catches are in relationships, pretty much, in terms of like they're not out there kind of hunting on the market. People are coming to them and approaching them. And I think that's probably the best comparison to relate it to something that all of us have some kind of experience with. So it's about managing the power dynamics and generating FOMO for your business. So it's a really tricky kind of line to strike in terms of following up and being prompt and not letting that potential investor slip through the net, but then also not coming across overly keen, because that can also turn them off. Because what I found is that a lot of people will tell you that all of their decisions are logic based, and I looked at the numbers and it works out and blah blah blah, but everybody invests pretty much based on their emotion, which is why bias is such a big thing in investment, especially early stage, and then they backdate it with logic, and they say, like, you kind of have that gut feeling, oh, I really like this person, I really feel like they can do it, I think the business is fantastic, and then they say, okay, and then all these numbers and metrics also support that initial gut impulsive feeling. So I think building a strong relationship with your investors, so that initial rapport and conversation before you jump into your pitch, I would say is just as important as the pitch. If they think, okay, I really like this person, I can see myself spending a day in a room with them, brainstorming and doing a session, and getting into this really long-term commitment and with them in terms of me investing my hard-earned cash in their business, they're a lot more likely to kind of pull the trigger and to be engaged and responsive, or even just give you some crucial feedback that can help you get the next investor.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
If
I can just pop in on that. I think the one thing that is important though is a lot of times these, especially angels, we're not their priority, right? So we have to be consistent with our follow-up, and I've had people who have like not replied to me and not gone back to me. So also sometimes about finding the right channel to talk to them. So sometimes email just doesn't work, and you get their WhatsApp and all of a sudden you've like turned this into a conversation. The couple of people in this last round, one in particular, I had to like stalk him, but he was a warm introduction and he ended up investing in the business, but he was like, you're just not my priority, right? Like he was very like honest about it. And he was like, but if you hadn't kept persisting, I probably would have just let this drop off my radar. So I think there is a fine line between, staying, and this is why I think what Sydney was mentioning about tracking everything is so important, because you never know, right? Making sure, when did you last reach out to them? What was their response? I guess my opinion is always, until I hear a no, it's not no. It's just not, because you haven't actively told me to go. And it's the same thing with sales, with our sales strategy, because we use our investor outreaches now as a sales campaign. We're tracking it just like we did. It's all in HubSpot. So now we moved, we're tracking every single conversation, because we're also hearing quite a lot of not yet, come back to us. So I need to, if I'm building those relationships, I need to remember who to go back to. So completely just using this entire thing as a sales campaign. And we found, so Aaron Simpson, who's the founder and CEO of Quintessentially, which is like a premier membership brand across the world, is advising and investing in Ugenie. And we did that through a LinkedIn messaging campaign. It's a numbers game. So, kind of went at the strategy of, if we've run out of our own networking opportunities, and in COVID, we can't meet people, we have to leverage the tools we've got. And I think, sent out like, I don't know, some thousands of messages on LinkedIn, but we're tracking everything, and they have resulted in investment and customers.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to move on to questions now. Liv, I see you have your hand raised. Anyone else wants to ask the question live, stick your head up. But Liv, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you, Susan and Sydney. My question's around a pivot, in a way that, what is the best way to frame that narrative for investors when your traction sits with the initial concept? And I'll give you a bit of background, which might help you answer that. So my business was originally a D2C menswear made-to-order brand, where we were using a platform and machine learning to inform on size and style. So it was a personalized user experience. Based on feedback from both our MVP and our beta, as well as investors, we decided to pivot to a a B2B2C marketplace potentially, but certainly more like a recommendation and search model, so a pure tech solution. And that's to address things around the acquisition challenges, the consumer experiences, the challenges with traditional e-commerce. But a recent advisor said to us, well, don't speak to what you were before, just speak to what you want to be now. The challenge we have is that we haven't got the MVP yet for that. And I feel like all that time has been wasted in terms of the initial concept, which isn't totally different. It is a move on, it's an evolution, but ultimately the MVP and beta don't prove exact market fit. So I just wondered what your thoughts were, both having pivoted at different times in conversation with investors, if you would agree with that advisor, and therefore I guess encourage us to wait till we get our next MVP, which will be in 5 months, or if you think there is still value in what we've done.
Oh, 100% there's value in what you guys have done. Because without that feedback, that real world feedback, you would still be building the initial concept, which may or may not be what the market wants, right? So you've gone out and used your MVP to get user feedback. I mean, it'd be great if you could get some contracts or some letters of support for some kind of businesses to say, look, we would use this product once it's live. I think that will definitely strengthen the kind of next conversation. But you know, I guess I'm very similar to me, right? Because we went out and fundraised for one concept and then completely decided to go from a B2C to a B2B, B2B2C, I guess, as well, because our communities have members. Partially, I just said, this is what the feedback said, and this is what we're doing. And we pivoted without like needing to get the sign off. And then when we raised the next round of investment, we had the data proof, right? We talked to this many people and this is what they said. And we have these intentions. These businesses will sign up for Ugenie when this product is live. So we were demonstrating that early part of the story was important. Now today, though, if you ask me the same question, no, we disregard that first couple of years because some of our advisors are telling us they don't care how you got here. They care about what you're going to do now. Why is this product relevant now? Why are you going to, so I think it's almost like I'll share my deck with whoever wants to see it. There is a bullet point because they want to know why we can't ignore how long we've been around. We have to address what those first couple of years were like, but I get the same feedback. And today they're just like, no, it doesn't matter, right? Why are you relevant now? Why is this business going to make it? And I get, you know, what you guys can say is, well, we've done the feedback, we know. And even now for my next phase, so we're moving beyond, so Ugenie has multiple tiers and now we're starting to go into medium-sized businesses and enterprise. And we've already got some letters of intent. So now that we're raising our next round of proper funding, we can show this. So I think there's definite value, but I think you will hear from people, it doesn't matter, right? We need to know why your new product is going to make it. So I think that yeah,
I totally agree, and that's really valuable. Thank you. And I think that's our challenges. Previously, when we were speaking to investors, they were like, you need an MVP, you need a proof of concept, which we did. So we were going out and talking, we were ready to go, ready to raise this money. And now it feels like we've got to go back and wait. And yet we need the money kind of now. And it's like, I think, you know, your suggestion in terms of letter of intent, we've been told that recently, and that's definitely something we're going to do. And I guess the question is, and you guys might not be able to answer this, but, you know, is that letter of intent along with the feedback from the initial customer MVP, is that enough to raise now? Or do we probably need to wait and maybe raise more grants initially before we can raise? You know, you said you were raising $1 million and then you went down to 300. Maybe we need to do something like that just to get us that little bit further.
Yeah, I mean, I think raise what you can and get it in, because every single day, I think the investor mindset is changing, especially over the last couple of months. I mean, I had a coffee yesterday with an existing investor who we want to get to follow on. And he's like, I want to hear what Rishi says tomorrow, right? Today is like, there's a big announcement. So that mindset was still like, I need to understand what's going on. So it's just changing all the time. Consistently though, what we're seeing is for good businesses and good ideas, there is money out there. But if you go ahead, get enough money to build your MVP, your valuation will be different, right? When you go and raise the rest. So that might be the thing. If you raise right now without having a product that's in the market, you'll probably need to raise it at a less valuation, give away more of your company. If you go and build it, then show some traction and say, look, we're seeing this growth, then you can go and raise. And again, I'm going to do it around the February, March process, because April 1st is another big tax thing. And if, again, depending on the types of investors you're looking at, like people wanting to deploy capital for any sort of benefits. So it's another really good time to start raising. Right now, also going into we've done this before, going into November and December, it's a difficult time where people start to shut off from a customer point of view, from an investor point of view. So I guess my advice is raise what you can when you can, and take it in. But also the same thing we're doing, right? I know my traction is going to keep growing. So in a couple of months, when I want to raise a bigger amount, people won't push back on the valuation I want to achieve.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Susan said, which I think is pretty much perfect, is that it's really important to, in terms of the way that you talk about your business, because you're getting people to buy in, and you wanna kind of articulate that story in a really inspirational way. So not we did this and then now we're doing something completely different, and do you know what I mean? And we're gonna piece together that thing we did before with that traction with some letters of intent. But it's about, okay, that was the first stage of our business, and then now we're going on to the second stage of evolution, and we're using all of that experience, all of the success that we've proven to build something that's going to be even better. That's something that's actually like, okay, so they're going from one success to another, not we did that not so good. And do you know what I mean? So the way that you talk about it will get them excited and inspired, versus thinking like, that wasn't right, so now we're trying something else, and give us the money to try something else that also might not be right. These are two very different things that you're presenting, which are the same scenario. So the way I would just say, really think about it in a storytelling capacity, because people remember stories, like, and all the details of stories much more than they remember like you just spitting facts at them. So the story of your journey, which I'm sure kind of Susan's become kind of like perfect at perfecting, in terms of actually we had this thing for 2 years, but actually using that as a stepping stone and a launch pad into the next phase of your business, I think will help you to pull those investors over the line.
I think that's
Amazing.
amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick question from the chat, and then Jody will go to you. Haley asked, would love to get your perspective on going solo versus having a co-founder. What has been your experience and feedback you've received?
So I did start with a co-founder, and I found finding my co-founder was the first thing I did. I actually found my co-founder when I was working. So I spent 2 years at Nomura, Japanese investment bank, and then I spent 1.5 years at a fintech startup. And I met my co-founder and gone on a thing called Founders Nation before I'd even left the bank, because I knew that I wanted to start a business at some point, and that I wasn't technical, so I needed to find a techie person, and that relationship was really important. Long story short, when I went full-time on the business, he's got a wife, kids, family, mortgage, so he couldn't just kind of like quit with just his savings and do you know what I mean, and live like a student. So our responsibilities, I was pretty much doing everything, and he was just building the product. He didn't have any kind of C-level responsibility, so we had to work all of that out, and managed to get him down from having 34% share in the business to 6%, with kind of like him needed to meet targets for that to be kind of to be cashed in stages. Yeah, but luckily we had a really good relationship, and that didn't get kind of messy, but I can definitely see how it would get messy with the wrong people. So I think that making sure that if you do go into business with someone, you are very confident in their character, and their ability to deliver, and their commitment is really important, because it sinks a lot of companies, or it kind of propels a lot of companies, that relationship. So yeah, it's I think every kind of, yeah, but now I'm technically a solo founder, but I didn't start like that. Yeah, that's my story in terms of co-founders.
Well, I'm married to mine, so I didn't really go and find him. He found me. But it's been great. I mean, we've found people push back on that. Actually, they don't like the fact. Some people hate the fact that we're a husband-wife team, because if our marriage breaks up, then our business breaks up. And I'm like, well, if my marriage breaks up, I've got bigger problems here. And but at the end of the day, on the other side, I still don't pay myself, right? So if my husband wasn't my co-founder and he wasn't financing our life and paying our mortgage, then the business wouldn't also be here. So it has its pros and cons. One of our most recent investors, though, only invested in us because he's like, but you really are a solo founder, because honestly, you're leading this. Your husband does some partial things part-time. Whereas other people have said they wouldn't invest in a solo founder. So, I don't think there's any perfect answer out there at all. I mean, some people, you just hear so many different pieces of advice. I think the benefit of having a co-founder, though, is, especially one that's working with you full time, is that it's so lonely being a founder, right? It's so stressful. Like, there are times where I'm like, God, this fucking just happened and I don't have anyone to talk to. So I'm like calling him at work he's at BarCap and he's like, I can't answer the phone right now. I'm doing my real job to pay our mortgage. So it's really frustrating. And then I'm like, who do I talk to? And luckily now we have other team members, but having that co-founder there, I think is just also good for your mental health. If you can have someone who's solid and who's good for the business and all that. But to be said that right now we're open to a new co-founder. Actually, we've been putting some feelers out there for someone in the right space who's done, communities and memberships and things. And if we can find the right person to join the company, I would be open to giving them co-founder status, because as we now scale, that can add quite a lot of value to the business. So yeah, I don't know if that helps, but people hate the fact that I'm married. Some people love it. Some people love the fact that I'm a solo founder. Some people hate it. So I just think be who you are and play the strength up. And I think also play the system, know who you're talking to and just play up the right narrative, as long as it's aligned with who you actually are.
God, why do so many people have to have so many different opinions? It's so difficult. Okay, we only have 1 minute left. So Jody and Ash, actually, Ash, I see you put your hand on. Okay, Jody and Mindy, can you both share your question really, really quickly? And then Sydney and Susan will ask them both to you.
Mine's really simple. It's first of all, both of you guys are amazing, but I want to know how you did the parties, because I can totally do this. I think it's a great idea. Like, you had people come and pay for their own drinks. What did you entice them? How did you entice them to come? Like, what did you do?
And so, sorry, before we answer that, Mindy, can I get your question too?
Thank you. My question's for Sydney. So when you stopped being one founder of two and you went to being a solo founder, how did you handle that conversation with did you already have investors in at that point? And how did you handle that change in status with them? And did it affect any of their investment decisions with you?
So I'd already kind of sorted that out before we kind of closed the round. So I kind of pitched myself anyway as a solo founder, even though we were kind of sorting out the nuances of the contract. And then once that was kind of sorted out, just told them all, gave them access to view the contract so that they could see the contract between myself and now my technical lead. And it was pretty kind of like, there was a few kind of heated conversations between myself and him, but I think that we both wanted the same thing, which was to come to a reasonable conclusion that reflected our efforts in the business. And yeah, so it wasn't, there's a few times where it could have got tricky, but I think we managed to tread the line quite well. And yeah, so I think that if you're the one who's got that direct relationship with the investors and they can see that, okay, this person isn't acting like a co-founder, actually it's within their interest, because if they're going to give up equity, then that's more equity for them to potentially take, and more equity for you to kind of raise later on down the line. Because if you've split it equally down the middle, you're thinking about kind of raising loads of rounds later on, your share is split in half automatically. Whereas kind of at the moment I've still got like 85% of my company, right? Whereas if I was equal split kind of co-founder, I would have kind of less than 50% already, and we've only raised kind of a really small round, which means I don't have the right to be able to kind of overrule anything in terms of decisions on the board and all this other stuff. So it's like there's a lot of things that come with benefits of being a solo founder. So I'm happy that I'm a solo founder, especially because, like I said, we've got a team now who all treat the business like their own. So it's nice to be able to kind of bounce ideas off of someone else. But it wasn't tricky with investors because they already saw me as a solo founder.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Susan, if you could answer Jody's question really quick. We have our next speaker in the waiting room, so we've got like 30 seconds.
No problem. So we put a little bit of budget on the event for sure. Like we wanted to provide at least one drink if we could, right? Sometimes it wasn't wine, it was non-alcoholic. I found pubs that wouldn't give me a minimum spend. And I think actually post-pandemic, a lot of venues are looking to fill, right, their spaces. So you try to find a pub or a central venue, because you want people to come, and the easier you can make it, like in terms of location, the better. Obviously we wanted a screen, so it did limit where we could do the presentation, but I literally just combed and called as many happy to give you some of the recommendations of who we used. And of course I couldn't have a minimum spend, but people came, right? And they appreciate, I'm a startup, I can't give you a boozy night, right? Like I'm happy if I can give you one drink, and then people just paid on their own. So you can keep it really, really lean. Again, we also, I think, used a shareholders' home once because they were centrally located, they were happy to support, and they were happy to host the drinks, which made it much leaner because it was someone's house and we just bought a couple of bottles of wine. So that's the other way I think that you can go about it, is if you have someone like a supporter who could lend you a space. Feel free to reach out though if we want to talk in more detail.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Sydney and Susan. It was really wonderful to hear from both of you. We will share your LinkedIn profiles with the founders, if you don't mind, because I'm sure there's going to be people who will want to connect, but we'll wave goodbye to you. And thanks.
Thank
Okay,
you.
but founders, stick around. We've got a pitch session. Shall we stop recording quick, Putty?